All right, let's do a quick testing. Can you guys hear me through the webinar? Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Are we all set? Yes, perfect. All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Donna Chow, your host and your moderator for today's class. Today's webinar is recorded, and it is presented by Lotus Institute of Integrative Medicine. 1 second, Sam, it's not moving. It's not moving. Yeah, okay. Okay. All right, so today's class is presented by Lotus Institute Integrative Medicine, and here at eLotus, we have been hosting educational seminars and webinars for over 2 decades, and we are proud to be your trusted source for premium CEU content with over 120 speakers, 600 courses, 3,000 hours of continuing education. So out of curiosity, how many of you are attending the webinar with Mark for the first time today? Okay, and let me see how to... And how many of you guys are returning? All right, great. So we have some people who attended Mark's class with us. It must have been the one that he did this week or the 3-hour one. Thank you so much for coming back, and we hope you enjoyed today's class. And we are lucky to have with us Mark. He is a new speaker presenting Shang Han Lun Acupuncture, and it's a topic that we have never had before. Usually Shang Han Lun is on the herbs. And so Mark is one of the best students of Jeffrey Yuen, and he has a deep understanding of the classics and is so elegantly applying the theories to practical approach in his clinic. He is filled with so much knowledge and extremely generous with it. You're going to learn a lot today, so make sure you have your pen and paper out with you, and your brain will hurt, but in a good way. You're going to love it. Actually, do me a favor. Once you picked your favorite clinical pearl from today's class, post it on your Facebook or your Instagram and tag eLotus and Mark. That way we can see and we can all learn from each other. So use the hashtag eLotusSHL, and we'll see what, at the end of the day, what we've all learned. If you collected more than one golden nugget from today's class, post it all so that we can help each other absorb the information, because what one person remembers may be different from what someone else remembers. And I'm excited to see what you guys will be posting later on today. So today's class is Shang Han Lun Acupuncture Part 1 with Mark Master Andrea. This course will give you an overview of the physiological and pathological understanding of the 6 stages as described in the Shang Han Lun as a channel continuum. And remember, today is one half of the class, so to attend the whole thing, be sure to sign up for tomorrow as well. If you already have plans tomorrow, you can also order the course as a video that when it is a more convenient time for you. So today we have 3 groups joining us today. Our first group is our Watch It Free group. You're registered for today's webinar using the coupon code for free access of today's live event only. Now, if you would like to earn CEUs or get the 4-week video replay, you can upgrade to our second group, and that is our paid group. Group 2 paid attendees receive CEU credit and can rewatch the contents of today's class for as many times as you like for a whole month. That's 4 weeks of unlimited access for today. I'll enter the link to purchase the class for you in the chat room once I get back to my computer, or you can check the reminder email that I sent earlier today, and it does have a link that will take you to repurchase the class if you attended today's class for free. And finally, our last group, our third group, is our Gold Pass members. Welcome new Gold Pass members. We recently ran an annual special, and actually today we're going to come back and give those who didn't sign up one last chance to sign up for the Gold Pass at $9.99. So Gold Pass members have access to all of our CEUs unlimited, and even today's webinar. You don't have to pay again, and Gold Pass members can access any of our English courses for as long as you are a member. Plus, you receive special perks from our industry sponsors like Evergreen Herbs and Helio Medical Supplies. Again, we just recently had our annual sale, and last week we received a letter from the California Acupuncture Board regarding increase in fees for renewing our licenses, as well as increasing the fees for continuing education, providership, and application fees. Next year, CEU courses may increase in price all across the board for all companies. So I will discuss how you can get the Gold Pass a bit later today and save some money. I'd also like to take this time to thank Evergreen Herbs for sponsoring today's event for free, as well as thank their customers. When you choose Evergreen as your herb provider, you're also choosing to invest in the advancement of TCM and provide opportunities like today's class, in which you and your colleagues can attend for free these educational courses that will fine-tune your skills. We share the same love for Chinese medicine like you and would like to see it benefit as many people as possible. Thank you so much for your support. All right, so before we begin, I would like to cover a few housekeeping topics. Today's webinar is from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. Pacific time. Our lunch is scheduled from 1 to 2 p.m. And we'll have 2 breaks in the morning and 2 in the afternoon. We'll let you guys know when that is. It's going to be about 10 minutes long. And if you are going to chat, make sure you have your chat set to all panelists and all attendees. If you're just, unless you, it's automatically set to all panelists, which means only the host. So that will be me and the tech and Mark. Only we will see it. So if you want your colleagues to see it, or if you're answering a question, make sure you're setting it. Just take a look at it, that it's set to all attendees also, so that it's a public response. And if you are logged in for today and paid for today's class or are a Gold Pass member, it's 8 CEUs that you will be getting. You do need to take a quiz at the end, and I'll send an email on how to do that as well. And also for paid and Gold Pass attendees, you get that 4-week video access. So again, for free attendees, you only get access to today's live event only. All right, we're all set. Let's get started with today's webinar with a brief introduction. Mark studied Chinese medicine at the Swedish Institute in New York. Soon after, he opened Po Chu Lam Clinic. It's a highly successful Chinese medicine clinic with offices in both New York and Connecticut, treating patients with a range of diseases and disorders. In 2016, he closed the doors to Po Chu Lam Clinic and moved to Beijing to study the Chinese language and culture, more Chinese medicine, and Bagua Zhang with Shu Shi Shi. In 2019, after studying with Shu Laosi since 2013, he became his final disciple for his lineage of Yin-style Bagua Zhang. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and give a big warm welcome to Mark. So Mark, go ahead and take over, and you can share your PowerPoint from your end.
Okay. Hi, guys. Let's see what we can do here. Here we go. Bum, bum, bum. Can you see me?
Yes, it worked.
Good. All right. Well, hello and welcome to today's class. It's been a long time coming. I put a lot of work into these notes. They are an amalgamation of things I learned in school, from Jeffrey Yuan, from other teachers, also in China, studying the Shang Han Lun, and then years and years of practice in clinic applying this stuff. So we'll also get a little bit an understanding of the channel theory today based on the martial art that I practice, Bagua Zhang, because there is the aspect of these channels being used physically. You can see how they're used in a lot of Chinese martial arts. They're in all martial arts, but in Chinese martial arts, such as like Wing Chun and Bagua Zhang and different things like that, Tai Chi Chuan, you can see the action of them. So we'll talk about them. And I promise you guys, I'll go slower. The biggest critique I think I've gotten from people is that I go too fast, and most of that is because of time constraints. But we don't have time constraints anymore, so because we've got a long day, so we're going to stretch it out. So we'll go slower. Feel free to ask questions. I'll try to keep this chat window open to answer questions. If I miss your question, ask again, or if I find that it might take us off of where we're going, I might put it off to later, but at the end of the day, you'll be able to ask questions. So, all right, let's get started. All right, so welcome to today's Shang Han Lun based acupuncture. Before we get started, I just want to say that Shang Han Lun is an herbal tradition, right? So the idea of Shang Han, or the injury due to cold, when written by Zhong Jing in the Han Dynasty, he was approaching this from an herbal tradition, because based on the idea in the Neijing, in the Suan they talk about, is that cold is treated by the 5 flavors. However, as time went on into the Tang Dynasty and the Song Dynasty, the development of acupuncture to treat using the idea of the 6 levels, the 6-channel theory, the 6-level theory developed. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk about that. Sun Simiao was one who really added to that idea. Other people like Cheng Ji Wu added to the idea. A lot of these physiological aspects, understanding how the pathology moves along the various channels and things is very important, because I noticed that a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years, they kind of just memorize patterns and then they explain the pathomechanism within this pattern, but they don't necessarily show the channel aspect and how things are moving. They kind of explain things only based on an organ theory. And we're going to talk about the channel theory, because actually that's where everything begins. And that's how it moves from Zangfu to Zangfu, right? To organ. So we're going to talk about that today. I also want to preface this by saying this is a principle-based idea, meaning that you can take this as long as you are working within the principles and you can change it. I'm just giving you ideas to work with, right? My goal is to create Chinese medical thinkers, not create cookie cutter, I'm a acupuncturist and I do this protocol and that protocol. No. That is not what I'm trying to do. That should never be that idea. In fact, that's what I feel detracts from Chinese medicine and detracts from the free thinking in Chinese medicine, is that when you try to pin things into one thing or one practical this or that or any or protocol, I feel like that's when you begin to have issues. So we are going to work with this. All right. So I see questions here already popping up. Oh, these are about the notes. All right. So let me move this so I can get this out of here. Here we go. All right, let's get started. So first slide. All right. So often today, when people practice acupuncture or Chinese medicine, they are referring to this as TCM. But I would like to point out that TCM is actually one school or one idea. It's one train. It's one thought process. It's a school. It's a tradition. Just like Shang Han Lun or Wenbing or the Piwei Lun, the school of the spleen and stomach, the Earth School, some people call it. All these different schools, even the balance method by Dr. Tan or Master Tung's points. These are schools of thought. We have the school of harmonization. We have the school of nourishing yin. We have the Gong Sha Pai, the school of attacking and purging, what we call here in the West. These are traditions and schools. The most modern one, the most modern large one, is the tradition, what we call TCM, which is an amalgamation of a number of different things that people felt worked well, and they used a way to talk about things, and they presented with a diagnostic language and pattern that allowed different schools to talk. So that's one of the big things that TCM has really, come forward and really presented. And this is one of the kind of the geniuses of TCM as a school of thought, because it's not Chinese medicine as a whole. It's not even close to Chinese medicine as a whole, but it is a legitimate tradition that has a lot of foresight into the idea of how can different schools talk to each other. And so it's created these patterns and kind of created a general language and a language that we can crosstalk with. And this is really important. So I just want to point that out, because today and tomorrow when we talk about Shang Han Lun, we will be discussing things in an idea of things like Shanghai or Zhongfeng, so the injury due to cold or being struck by wind. And that might include TCM patterns within that. But in the Shang Han Lun and in the Huangdi Neijing, they talk about these as this group of patterns. So Shanghai has all of these different symptoms. Some we would call wind cold today. Zhongfeng, being struck by wind, has all these can have all these different symptoms. Some of them are heat. We might call wind heat today, using a TCM verbiage. But I just want to point out that that's because the most prevalent practiced tradition today is TCM, not because it's better. It's just been the one that's been pushed mostly in China as sort of a amalgamation that allows people to crosstalk and join things easily, and it becomes the most taught in the schools. But what we're going to go over is Shang Han Lun. And so we're going to be sticking to Shang Han Lun ideas. You're not going to see common ideas that are in TCM. So, for example, releasing the exterior in an exterior wind pattern, you would see in TCM as using Hogu, right? Large intestine 4. We're going to be learning other points that stick to the idea of the level of Taiyang. So the Taiyang level, where the entrance of the pathogen might be coming in, we're going to use points on the Taiyang channels. So that might be bladder and small intestine channels. So, all right, let me just, I'm just trying to see where the, okay, I guess we're going to go. So this is the first slide. The next one here. All right, so the Shang Han Lun is the first recorded tradition in Chinese medicine that we have today. So it came shortly after the idea of the Huangdi Neijing. We'll go back. So it came shortly after the idea of the Huangdi Neijing, and it uses a lot of the principles and the aspects of the Huangdi Neijing. So Wenbing, in the idea of Wenbing, historically may be considered the last tradition, the most recent one, other than TCM. It's really the most recent one, and in the opinions of teachers of mine like Jeffrey Yuan, and even things that I've seen in China, I would say that while Shang Han Lun is pretty rounded out, and we've pretty much rounded this as a tradition, I would say Wenbing is still progressing, and it's still kind of being formed. It's not completely done being formed yet. So we'll see how that moves in the future and over the next centuries. All right, so the idea here of the Shang Han Lun dates back to the Han Dynasty. In this, I'm going to put a lot of Chinese. I really think it's important to include Chinese and to become semi-proficient in reading and identifying certain Chinese characters associated with Chinese medicine. So I'll include a lot of pinyin in these slides. At sometimes I won't include pinyin if I've listed the character a lot, and also understand that these slides have been written at different times. So sometimes if I'm up at 2 a.m. finishing up slides, I might just be too tired to write all the pinyin for everything. But I'll never leave you without something that you can't understand. So, all right. I'm trying to see here, just look at Q&A. All right, these are still about notes. All right, so it dates back to the Han right, the Han Dynasty, and that exists from about 2006 BCE, before the Common Era, to about 220 CE. So at this time, many people believe that this was the time period that the Huangdi Neijing and the Nanjing were written. So keep in mind that this is going to be the language of the Han Dynasty. We're going to see more in the Shang Han Lun. But the language that we see in the Neijing and the Nanjing is actually older than the Han Dynasty, and it comes from what we call the Zhangguo period. That's the period of the Warring States, and that's how they differentiate historically. And they say, hey, Shang Han Lun is actually not as old as the Huangdi Neijing because of the language. Kind of like if we read, our modern newspaper today and we read Shakespeare, we know that Shakespearean language is older. So if we read another document with that language, we're going to assume that it also comes from an older time period. However, something like Wenbing, right? So Wenbing actually spans the idea of being created in two different dynasties. So the most recent tradition, Wenbing, is the idea that, or it started in the late Ming dynasty with this idea of these pestilent epidemics coming along and these Wenyi, these hot diseases, and spreading very quickly. And it moved, and it was developed all the way to the early Qing dynasty, right? Let's just say Qing Dai, it says Qing Dai, but it's, so this is this idea that things can span dynasties in creation. They're not just one man or one person. Many people added to the Shang Han Lun theories or many commentaries to it. In fact, we don't even have the earliest books written by Zhong Jing. They were probably written down by his followers, as we'll see, and then they were transcribed by people, and people added to the theories. Just like in the Wenbing, in Wenbing, you have many doctors adding to this. It's not one person's idea. One person has an idea and another person adds to it and adds to it and adds to it. And so understand that just because you don't see something in the Shang Han Lun as a text doesn't mean it doesn't exist in the framework of Shang Han Lun, because many people add to this idea. It's not just Zhong Jing. Many people came along and added to it. Sun Sima Yao worked with it. Cheng Ji Wu in the Song Dynasty added to it. So we're going to see these things. All right, let's see. All right, so Zhong Jing. So he was born in the eastern Han city in the prefecture of Shanfan in what is today considered Hubei province, right? So this was about the time of 142 to 220 CE, the Common Era. He was born to a noble family. He was trained to be able to go and work in government because that was considered the highest level that you could get in society in ancient China. So he was educated to be a Confucian scholar because a lot of the tests to work in government, to work for the emperor or the ruling nobility, was one that you had to be educated in the functionings of the government and Confucian ideals of society and how it should function. However, when he was young, he was living in a village. And this village, a lot of times in China, when you go, like I've been in villages in Shandong and different places, you realize like this village might have a few hundred people, and there may be only 3 families that make up the whole village. And they're not that closely related, but they're still pretty much, when I was in Shandong, for example, I went to a 2,000-year-old village and I spent time with a student of mine and his family. And there was only 3 or 4 total families in the whole village. There was about 170 people that span this whole village. And there was only about 4 families that made it up, 3 families. So it's very common that in Zhong Jing's time, he lived in a village and there were many, many family members because they don't really travel that far outside and they've been living there for so long. And then outsiders might be brought in, say if a woman marries, she'll move into the village, right? And so she'll move away from her family. And so you get this kind of cross back and forth, and you'll get villages next to villages bring people in, or people are leaving, and you get this kind of cross communication, right? Of genetics and whatnot. So you have this village, and this epidemic struck, and it killed many, many of his family. And it drove him to study medicine because, as being a Confucian scholar, the idea of filial piety, or an obligation to his ancestors and to humanity, that's a big, important thing in the Confucian ideas, in Kongfuzi, we say. So his idea is that you need to show obligation to your ancestors, to your family, to those who are older than you, and also to society as a whole. And so he ended up apprenticing. He apprenticed with another family member, Zhang Bozu, to learn more about how to treat this. And through his apprenticeship, he observed a lot of things, right, through clinic and experience. And so through that experience, he wrote a book that we call Shang Han Lun, which means the treatise on injury due to cold, and Zabing means like miscellaneous, like a bunch of different kind of things working in coordination, disease. So this text is comprised of 2 parts, and we've split it up today. And most people know about the Shang Han Lun. So the Shang Han Lun is one part of the text, and that's all about cold diseases, right, and what happens. And the other one is called the Jingui Yao Lu, which is the essential prescription of the Golden Cabinet. And this is mostly about pediatrics, gynecology, and things like that. It also refers to ideas and concepts that could be considered early ideas on tan or phlegm, and the kind of suggestion for the idea of origin of this and how it's created. Although he doesn't use the terms explicitly, that comes later, but the ideas are there. You can see this kind of moving. So that's an idea. So Zhong Jing only had 2 students, right? So his 2 students were, they probably did not write down a lot of what he wrote, or he did not write down a lot of what he wrote. The scrolls that he wrote were lost mostly during the Sangguo, which is a 3-kingdom period, right? So this is a time when you have a lot of secrecy and a lot of tradition. I don't want to tell you this and that. So like he wasn't telling a lot of people. You had to be what they call a guanmen, like a closed door student. This idea of being inside, this neimen, this inside the door, inside the gate type of student. And so you would tell this person and not tell that person, right? And because this is our secret and this is how we make money, and you have to be an apprentice and get to a level. This is still ironically practiced in China today in a lot of martial lineages, which is actually one of the reasons a lot of them are dying, is because there's not enough open teaching to help this progress. And because of that, a lot of people are dying out without being able to pass on their entire lineage. This is actually one of the reasons I moved to China to study with Shu Shixi in his Bagua Jiang, because when I first met him in 2013, he told me that he teaches a certain amount openly, right? This they call kaimen, this open kind of public thing. But then there's this kind of, when you get to a certain level, a lot of things are this indoor thing, and he's not going to teach you beyond a certain point unless you really become an indoor disciple. So he had approached me, for example, about becoming an indoor disciple. And I thought about it, and I, wasn't so sure. I had clinics here in the States, and I had a life in the States. But then I just realized I got to do it. So I left everything, and I went to China to study with Shu Shishi and take on his whole Bagua lineage. And that's a big thing when you become an indoor disciple in Chinese culture. You're carrying something on your shoulders and representing this, and you're literally the lineage. And so that's still practiced today. If it wasn't for the fact that I went to China, Shu Laoshi may have died and never passed on his whole system. He's taught many people, and he's taught many people things, but I think he said he's only had 2 or 3 disciples in his whole life, and most of them don't even practice Baguazhang anymore, or they do, but they left and they don't really teach. So they have jobs and families and this and that. So consider that as something that's really important. So sometimes it's very hard to get these things transmitted and passed on when they're indoors. So take at a time like the Sangguo, the Warring States period, where everything's passed on through inner gate stuff. This is going to be very difficult. You're not going to see it publicly. You're not going to see it taught publicly or talked about publicly. So it wasn't until the Shi Jin, the Western Jin dynasty, that Wang Shuhe. So Wang Shuhe wrote the Mai Jing, the Pulse Classic, right? So he reorganized the Shang Han Lun into 2 different parts. And that's where today we get the idea of the Shang Han Lun and the Jingui Yaolu. So we get these 2 books separated, and that's how we read them today. We don't read the original scrolls that Zhong Jing left. We don't have translations. We don't have access to those. We have access more to stuff that was reorganized by Wang Shuhe. So let's go back a little bit. So if we go back to even before the Han Dynasty, right? Then we've got what we call the Zhou Dai. So the Zhou Dynasty, right? And this is came before that. So prior to the Han Dynasty, during the Zhou Dynasty, we had this idea. I'm just trying to get this out of the way. There we go. We had this idea that people mostly went to shamans and priests rather than doctors when they were ill. There may have been doctors, but they were just beginning out of the shamanistic and the priestly ideas of things. Zhong Jing was one of the first people who really presented this idea of being like having treatment due to external factors influencing the body, constriction of yang, rather than supernatural entities, which was very common beforehand, with the idea of clearing out angry ancestors, or you angered the ancestors, we must appease them, or something like that. So he was changing this idea, right? So when the body is afflicted with Shang Han, this idea at this time, the idea was that you had this affliction, this contextual epidemic. They referred to this whole epidemic that was going on as injury due to cold, right? So the whole general idea of this epidemic was Shang Han, this injury due to cold. When this happened to a specific person, the body would rouse its yang qi to push the cold out of most of the yang, out of the most yang part of the body, because that's what the cold is going to strike first. That would be the Taiyang vessel, right? So the thing is that if the body is unable to effectively push out the pathogen, it can move deeper into the body, traveling layer by layer by layer. Over time, it can lodge itself deeper and deeper, creating these pathological changes, right? Eventually weakening organs and everything else. So paying attention to the pathological process, healing, because healing can happen or in the reverse of the trajectory that the pathology went in. So if it goes in through Taiyang, Shao Yang, Yangming, Tai Yin, Shao Yin, Jue Yin, it will, chances are, go out in the same manner. So this is where you get the idea of healing crises, right? Or this idea of the law of healing, that you will go back through and have to resolve the things you previously had trouble with before you get over them. So this is also seen in a lot of Hippocratic ideas and the Hippocrates stuff. I just want to also say I got a couple of questions since the last kind of thing we did on Wednesday. Some people ask me, well, why should we use this? Well, why is this different than using the lungs as the first one? Well, here's the thing in Chinese medicine. For people who have that question and they kind of struggle with it, and why do we have all these different ideas? And when you read the Huang Di Neijing, it doesn't make sense because it says this travels and that travels and this does this and that does that, and they seem to contradict. What is being explained in a lot of these ancient texts, and even in Chinese medicine, are these channel systems. Now, we know that the channels are described as rivers. they're described as these waterways. I used to live in the on the water. I actually, from the ages of 12 to 14, I lived on a boat, and I traveled the east coast of the United States, and I spent time in the Caribbean and the Bahamas on a sailboat. I was a sailor with my grandparents for a period of time. My grandparents were marine biologists, and so I spent a lot of time on the boat with them. And one thing is, when you're on a waterway, is that there are tides and there are currents, and the tide can move with the current or they can move against the current. You can have rip tides that go out under, you can have undertows that go underneath, even though a current's coming in, things can do this. You can have different layers in the water where things are moving one way in one layer and another way in another layer, and sediment and certain types of water or things flow in one layer of the water and other things flow in another layer. This is what the Chinese are describing. The channels are this three-dimensional structure of things that are moving, not always in the same way. So when you read these descriptions and they confuse you because it doesn't seem like it matches just one idea of going from the lung to the large intestine to the stomach to the spleen, that's because that method is the movement of qi through the primary channels, not necessarily through the Jing, the sinew channels, or other areas of the body. And also at the same time, there could be other movements through the primary in a different way due to other physiological aspects. So it's important to understand that these are layers. And whenever if you go fishing or you go sailing or you go swimming, you can see this in the water. Understand that this is also existing in your body, these different layers of things, right? And so that's really, really, really important. All right. So Wang Shuhe. So Wang Shuhe, we know he wrote the Mai Jing. If some of you guys may have read it, there's a translation in English by Bob Flaws. You can get it in Chinese. When I was in Beijing, because I lived in Beijing for the past 4 years, you could buy it on Taobao for like, $1 or $2. It's not a very long book. So a lot of the text, these texts, the Shang Han Lun and the Jingui Yalu, they're both edited by him. So you'll notice that the way he pieces them together, he pieced them together differently than probably what Zhong Jing had. He also credits his Mai Jing with. He also gives credit to Zhong Jing as far as like the pulse positions go. In the Mai Jing, he credits those to Zhong Jing as well. So take into consideration that he admires and he kind of garnishes praise on Zhong Jing. So let's talk about Cheng Wuji. So Cheng Wuji was a physician in the Jin right, in the Jin Dynasty. He was a member of the school of harmonization. And his addition to this whole theory is that he believed that the pathology went from Taiyang, Shao Yang, and then to Yangming. So the idea prior to him was that a lot of people would say it went from Taiyang to Yangming to Shao Yang. And we'll go into this and why they thought this versus why I'm going to teach you guys this method and why this works like this. Now, his argument for this is because the diaphragm, which cuts and spreads the upper chest from the lower body, right? So this diaphragm, remember, a diaphragm just isn't in the front, it goes all the way around the back, right? And things go through it, the esophagus, right? The stomach sits right under it. So there's a lot of influence and things here. And this is where the heart and the lungs are, and this heart fire, and there's the lungs diffusing. And then below you've got the kidneys, and the lungs, they interact, right? They communicate. So his argument based on this diaphragm is that it's the axis and the representation of Shao Yang, right? It's this pivot between the external, that I can breathe out, right? And the internal, that's down in the bowels, right? So this is what Shao Yang, this is the idea that Shao Yang can represent, this diaphragm, this pivot between these two things. So we talked about maintaining the integrity of Shao Yang was very important. So the maintaining of the integrity of the diaphragm was very important to keep pathology from going into the abdomen. Keep this in mind, because when we get into later conversation about pathological progression, this is going to come up and it's going to be a big thing. So if you wonder, well, why does he put Shao Yang before Yangming? The reason why I did it in this case is because you'll see that there's going to be a focus on diaphragmatic integrity. All right, let's just check here. All right, next one. All right, so in the Huangdi Neijing, we talk about external factors and illness being due to this influence of external factors. Things can be wind and cold, emotions, right? Dietary problems, sexual overindulgence, right? Let's just see. All right. So we have a few things that can affect the body as an exterior pathogen, as from the Huangdi Neijing. So we have Zhongfeng, which is to be harmed by wind, right? We have Shang Han, which is cold. It's an injury due to cold. So the Zhongfeng really means to be struck by wind, right? To strike the center of the body. So you're not good with changing, right? The center is we call it a G, right? Like a pole, and you can twist on it. And if you're not good with change, you're not able to turn, you get bound up by wind. Wind, which is quick change, causes things to contract, right? So this is just harmed by wind, struck by wind, causing the body is not able to change and react quickly enough to the outside environment. Shang Han would be the injury due to cold. As it strikes it injures you. Wenbing is a warmth illness. So this is characterized by fevers, right? Jue Yin is the idea of a heat illness with a high fever. So that's a difference. So you can have, and then the last one is called Wenshi. So this is the idea of damp heat or heat damp, right? Fever that is decreased and suppressed by dampness. These are discussed in the Huangdi Neijing. Now, if you notice the stars here that I have on the Wenbing, Jue Yin, and the Wenshi, these are all complications of the first two, Zhongfeng and Shanghan. So these last three, I'm pointing my computer like you guys can see this, but you can't. So these last three are complications of qi stagnation and pathological progression from the first two patterns that move into the body and cause constriction and cause qi stagnation and a reaction from the body's wei qi, this defensive or qi. You could even call it offensive qi because it's reacting to things, right? It might not even be reacting. It prowls. One of the chapters of the Neijing talks about how it's very fierce as it moves through the body, right? And so this idea could even be considered offensive, but it warms the body and it reacts to things. So it creates in the struggle with the pathogen this warmth, and you'll see that these are complicating factors as we go on to these different pathological progressions. All right. These question from Dave says, aren't these all correlations of yin and yang interactions? Yes, they are, but understand that everything's in relation to each other and correlative. So as you go out, things spread out because what? The one begets the two begets the three begets a myriad of all things, right? This is from the Tao Te Ching. So this is an idea of relativity, but you need to understand that in certain places, this idea of relativity makes sense. And in this other idea, maybe you can't use such a simplified version when talking about something else. So it's okay to have multiple theories that run together. All right, so I just want to point out something here as we begin to talk about the idea of wei qi. So wei qi is this idea of this protective qi that runs through the body. In the Ling Shu chapter 52, we say that the floating qi, which does not follow the channels, is the protective qi, right? So I gave you some idea here on the top of the slide. I gave you the Chinese and I gave you the English. I translate some of the Chinese. Some of the Chinese I did not translate because I just didn't have enough time, so I pulled it out of a digital copy of the Neijing I have. So they're not always the best, but they'll work for what we're doing. So Huangdi says the five viscera are the storehouse of the seminal essence, the spirit, the animal spirit, and the human soul. The six bowels are those that receive water and valley qi, right? Gu qi. So this idea of this, food qi from digestion, and act to transform the food materials. The body's qi internally penetrates, moves into the five zang, all right? So the zang, and then externally, so it moves into the organs internally, and then externally circulates through the limbs and the joints, right? The floating qi, which does not follow the channels, is the protective qi. What does this mean? So this is referring to the fact that it does not follow the Jingluo. So it's not within this aspect of the primary channels. It's floating above it, and it's moving through the sinews, the Jing. It's moving through the Pibu, the cutaneous vessels. It's moving through the Wei level of the body. And we're going to go into the idea of how the body is broken up into three levels in an acupuncturist point of view. So when the yin yang flow together, outside and inside are connected like a sphere without corners. Let me see if I can do this. There we go. It flows quickly. And so this is something that Huangdi is saying, right? So we know that the seminal essence of qi moves in the channels and is the nourishing qi. So this is the yin qi, right? And pay attention, because the idea of yin qi will come back later on. And the idea of wei qi will be all throughout this. So the yin qi supports the wei qi, right? So keep this idea in mind. So when you're like, well, what level of the body is this floating in? The wei qi is floating in the exterior levels of the body, or the exterior aspects of different places on the internal aspect of the body. The yin qi is actually floating, or is actually moving in the channels internally to nourish the body. I include a lot of these quotes in here just so that you guys can get an idea. So chapter 35 also talks about this. It talks about the fact here, the beginning in chapter 35, when Chibo replies, this has to do with the idea of the pathogen entering the head and neck, right? This head and neck area and following down the spine. What is this? This head and neck area, as it follows down the spine, this is the Taiyang vessel. This is the Dumai. This is the source of the most yang. So as we talked about before, Taiyang reacts. This is an explanation as to the reaction of Taiyang. So each person has a different resistance, right? And he goes through and he explains how this moves down the spine. When the pathogen enters the body through the head and neck, the wei qi engages it there at the head and neck, right? So this is why you get tightness in the upper back, because the wei qi rises to the upper back of Taiyang and it tightens up, right? It does not always enter through Feng Fu, the wind warehouse at Du 16, that would be right here. Sometimes it enters through the upper back. Sometimes it enters through other areas. But when it moves, when it comes in, right, when the pathogen comes into the upper back, the wei qi will move to attack it, right? So it will, wherever it will attack it, so then you'll feel this tightness and this engaging of this wei qi, right? And this pathogen and this tightening up. Why does it tighten up? Because the wei qi can't go to nourish and warm the sinews, and that pathogen can cause constriction and tightness through cold constriction and other things. So we go on to say wind pathogens, of course, have no predictable entry point. Wind catches the moment the pores are open. So if your pores are open, wind can easily come through. This is the reason why, for example, in Qigong and martial arts, you'll see this dry bathing. Not only does it move wei qi and yin qi in the body, but it also allows you, after you're doing Tai Chi or things like that, it allows you to close your pores so that you're not struck by wind when you're done. Because you're warm, you're sweating, you've warmed the body up, the wei qi moves to the surface, it regulates the pores, it normally opens to what relieves some of that heat, right? You might even micro sweat. Or you might even macro sweat. You might actually sweat, you know. So then what you do at the end is you dry bath. A lot of times you'll see they come over the head. They take the Du energy, right? This yang energy. They move it right back down the spine, right? And they go to rub the channels to close them, to close the pores in the skin and cutaneous vessels. So this is what they're describing here. I go on, I explain, I added a little more. This is just from the Ling Shu. This just explains the idea of circulation of protective qi of wei qi. So you guys can read this. It's in the notes. We won't get too much into this but you'll just have this as reference. The whole point is to set this up so you understand references for wei qi and yin qi. You'll never see in the Huangdi Ne Jing this idea of wei qi, yin qi, and yuan qi, this source qi. That yuan qi isn't even talked about. We'll talk about this here in the slides later on, but it's not that term is not used in the Huangdi Ne Jing. They use other terms. So you have to kind of look to what they're referring to and then see later on what these ideas develop into later. So here's chapter 79, just give you some things. Here we go. Okay. The whole idea of this is to give you an understanding of the classics in a practical way that you can then apply and to show where these things are coming from. So got a lot of stuff in here so you can see this, and it explains this idea of where things are coming from. All right, so as we said in the Han Dynasty, we have this idea of this predominant two forms of pathology. One is Zhongfeng or Feng, this idea of wind. The other one's Han, cold, we call Shang Han, right? So these are these predominant ideas. By the time you get to the Song Dynasty, we have this expansion of things, right? So now we have the idea of the Liu Yin. So the Liu Yin are these 6 excesses. So 6 excesses include what? Wind, right? Cold, right? Obviously, we have those two. Then we have fire, summer heat, dampness, and dryness. Now, in the Han Dynasty, we would say all those other things actually come from the interactions of the body with wind and cold. And that's what you're going to see as we go into this and talk about this. That this actually stems from that, how the body reacts to these things. But in the Song Dynasty and beyond, they started to say, well, they don't have to come from wind and cold. You can have summer heat, and it doesn't have to be cold-based. You can have fire, it doesn't have to be wind-based or cold-based. You can have dampness, it doesn't have to be based on wind or cold, or dryness, it doesn't have to be based on wind or cold. So this is just spreading out. Again, it's what you see in clinic that's the most important thing. I'm just presenting you with these concepts so you understand them, but practicality and what you see in clinic is really, 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 really important. Sometimes you're going to find fire due to an invasion of wind or cold. Sometimes you may not. Sometimes you may see cold as an aspect, but you'll see fire as a major thing. Take what you see in clinic as truth and use the classics as a guide. Don't take the classics and try to force them into fitting a picture that doesn't necessarily fit in your clinical and real life application, because then not only do you do a disservice to your patients, you do a disservice to yourself for learning. But at the same time, don't reject the classics and say, oh, nobody understands them, because that's also, hogwash on the other end, because they can really actually be attributed to a good trail guide to understand how things are going. But sometimes the trail's a little different than what the guide says. If any of you guys have been hiking or camping, I know I have. I was an Eagle Scout, right? So when you go out hiking and camping, you'll find that a lot of things might not be exactly how they are in the guide. But there were people out there at one point drawing this because this is what they saw. Then the reality changes over time because things change, or your experience is a little different on the trail. Your experience is a little different in clinic. So take all of these things and follow the practical method of what's happening. So this concept, the concept in the Huangdi Jing was the idea, again, that the wind and cold were the external pathogens, but it became the focus. The focus of external disease became wind, cold, fire, summer heat, dampness, all these other things in the Song Dynasty. So again, this expansion continues on today, which is why you'll see later on that sometimes wind and cold pathologies in these different levels might seem like Yangming fire, might seem like liver fire rising, gallbladder qi stagnation. But understand that they're through the perspective of understanding how wind or cold have affected the body at this level. They're not wrong. They're just another explanation of how this goes. And if you can see how they overlay, you'll do that much better in clinic. Question: do I treat before heart, kidney? We'll get to that. Let's not jump the gun on treatments yet. We'll get to that through everything here. All right. So in the Huangdi Jing, chapter 31 of the Huangdi Jing Su Wen talks about Taiyang, right? So Taiyang is a contraction of febrile disease, right? It causes fever. That's what febrile means. And it causes pain. So the Huangdi Jing describes a few symptoms, not as many as the Shang Han Lun, but the Su Wen, which is where this comes from, describes a number of symptoms. So pain in the nape of the neck, right? We talked about wind can come in the back of the nape of the neck, pain in the head, pain in the lumbar spine, right? This is this cold contraction. Why? Because cold comes in, it goes right to the most yang, and then it causes contraction in the most yang. And then you can't move because you can't get the yang qi out. And it goes into areas that are predominantly yang. Think of what? Da Jue, right? The great hammer do 14 here. This moves yang qi out. Think of down in the lower back. Think of Ming Men, right? The idea of moving yang qi up and out to the body, it attacks us and it contracts us. And now it can't move out. What happens? The kidneys can't move their yang qi up Dumai and up Taiyang. And so you get this contraction. That's why you get this pain. So that's the physiological reaction, because cold moves down the spine. Keep this in mind, because how we treat it is going to be based on how it moves in the body. All right, so I give you guys an explanation from the Ling Shu chapter 76, explains the flow of yang, of Wei Qi pretty explicitly through the yang vessels. It explains it through the yin vessels, but not as explicitly, so I didn't include that here. So we talk about how when the eyes open, this causes the qi to ascend. So here, Jingming, right? We talk about this as bladder 1. Interestingly enough, this point in ancient times used to be called Mingmen. This was the idea of Mingmen. This is how you stimulated the movement of yang qi outwards. Today, people use Mingmen down here, but keep that in mind too, because when you're doing acupuncture based on the Shang Han Lun and based on the Huangdi Neijing ideas, you may want to replace the idea of Ming Men with this. You warm the lower back, but the idea of getting the yang out to the surface, bladder 1, what we call today Jingming, might be important, right? So the protective qi then follows what? The nape of the neck as it descends, right? It moves down and along the Taiyang channel. The channel follows the back and descends until it reaches the tip of the little toe. The protective qi spreads and separates at the canthus of the eye and descends the major arm channel down to the arm, down the hand, reaching the acupuncture gap of the tip of the little finger. So what we're talking about here is we're talking about across the back, nape of the neck and everything, all the way down. We're talking about how it flows down to Shou Taiyang, which is the small intestine channel. Does the Shang Han Lun address internally generated disease, or is pathology we look at today due to external invasion? So in the yin stages of Taiyang, or of Shang Han Lun, they talk about interior disease. Now, they look at it as being originated from some sort of weakening of the body through the yang states. And we'll go over that a bit today. Tomorrow, we'll really go over the treatment of that. But so that's the case there. However, remember this, sometimes you can weaken yourself in, say, a Tai Yin state, or you can have through like your diet, through things you eat, through excessively cold foods that weaken the spleen yang, that weaken the lung qi, right? You can also have a congenital disorder, some sort of constitutional disorder that leave you with some sort of weakened yin state that can't support the yang, right? So those things do exist, but particularly the Shang Han Lun was written to deal with this epidemic of infectious disease, and the idea of strengthening the yin to reinforce and strengthen the yang, to keep things out. So we'll see these things as they go. However, maybe you might find that you look at a patient who might have, if you want to look from a Shang Han Lun perspective, looking at them from the Shang Han Lun perspective, and you see, oh, they're Tai Yin deficient, they have spleen qi deficiency, this is an internal disorder. Maybe it's from constant attacks to the outside that have ultimately weakened them to the point where their Tai Yin has kind of disintegrated, you know. Oh, the flow of Wei Qi. So I'm sorry. So you're going to see this in here. So the Taiyang flow of Wei Qi. I'll write the pinyin in many of these other slides. Like I said, sometimes I was up till very late at night writing these slides. So so you're going to see this throughout. All right. So here's some more. So I just give you a lot of quotes from the classics so you understand where this is occurring and where I'm getting this information from. And so that's why you can see when people, what's Wei Qi? Where does that come from? This is where it comes from in the classic, particularly in the Huangdi Neijing. I'm citing the classic. I don't want to just say the classics because then it gets vague and I can mean any book, and that's not what I mean. Particularly the Su Wen, the Huangdi Neijing, which is what? The basis for the ideas of the Shang Han Lun. So when Zhong Jing is thinking about the Shang Han Lun, you can guarantee that he's thinking in terms of what? Huangdi Neijing theory, right? So in the Huangdi Neijing, they talk about Taiyang, they talk about these stages as being 6 days. Understand that the days are a metaphor. They don't literally mean you die in 6 days. They mean that each day is a stage in which somebody gets sicker and sicker. However, and some people, if they're very weak, it could be a metaphor. But I mean, it could be legitimate and real, but it's mostly not. It's a metaphor. So understand that. So when the cold comes in, it often goes to the area of the most yang, Taiyang, Dumai, right? Doesn't have to go directly to the most yang area, but it goes to the most yang channels. That's the first thing. They're the most protective. They're the harder channels. They're the ones with the most yang, right? So wind, feng, right, is yang. It likes to rise. So it's going to end up being seen in upper points. If you think about wind points in the body, they mostly exist in the upper body. Why? Because wind rises, right? So because wind rises, you're going to see a lot of points talked about in the Huangdi Neijing that deal with wind, and they're all on the upper body. Feng Fu, Du 16, Da Jue, the great hammer, right? Also, Da Ju, bladder 11, right? Feng Men, bladder 12, Bing Feng. So Bing Feng is another one. Jian Jing is another one. So we have small intestine 12, grasping the wind. Jian Jing, the shoulder well, gallbladder 21. These all deal with wind as they rise up the body, right? Notice most of these points are are all on yang channels, and they're in the early stages of a yang disease. They're all Taiyang, and they're all Dumai, and one of them happens to be Shao Yang. Why is cold drawn to the most yang? So we're going to get into that. So the idea is that cold moves into cause constriction because what? Yang will disperse cold. So as it's constricting, it's drawn to try to stop that which would expel it. So it'll go in and try to constrict and stop the movement of yang outwards that would try to dispel cold. When you shut that down, cold can sink, right? As it moves into these yang areas, as it constricts, it's going to be able to sink more and more and more into the body. This is why it creates this environment. So, Han or lung, right? So this is idea of yin. It has a tendency to sink to lower areas. So as it moves in, it contracts and then it sinks. It's heavy. So it goes down to the root of yang, which is what? Ming men, right? This idea of this kidney yang, right? So it sinks. So it gets attracted down here because it's heavy, and it sinks down to where the yang is rooted in the kidneys, and it's contracting and it's holding, and then yang can't move out. And as that happens, what? It pulls everything together and tightens, right? And it gets tighter and tighter, and then sinks because it's heavy and contracts, Ming men, right? So you have this interplay between things that are more yang, wind, that float high, and things that are more yin, right? Which are, this is Han, or this other, the first character is a character for Han, and the second character is Lun, which means cold or cool. Let's see. So the idea of Feng Han, or wind cold, goes into the Taiyang channels. It can move to the Yangming channels or the Shao Yang channels. Chapter 31 of the Su Wen lists Yangming as the next level, which we talked about. Shang Han Lun, you can see in some cases they list the Shao Yang channel. But again, follow which version you're looking at, but follow the clinical observation. Like I said, Cheng Ji Wu lists the idea of Shao Yang coming next. So when he was talking about Shang Han Lun principles, he was talking about that. However, you could see other versions of Shang Han Lun where it's Yangming and then Shao Yang. It doesn't matter the order, it matters what you see in clinic. And we'll go into explaining why it can move into one or the other later tomorrow. So the idea of Bing Feng, right, this grasping the wind, right, this is in the, I wrote the Shou Yangming. It's not the Yangming channel, I'm sorry. It's the, I'm sorry. So the Yangming channel and the Shao Yang channels both cross this idea of the small intestine 12. So you're getting this merging. You can see how things start to cross. They come up, they'll come to Dajue, they'll come to the Great Hammer. This is where Yang is connecting. They'll also connect down here. So you'll get this connecting and moving across the channels through the upper back. And this is how it'll start to move. You'll start at a Taiyang expression, and people are like, oh, well, it just goes from Taiyang to Shao Yang. Yeah, but how? Where? You know, what's going on? This is important. It's the upper back, places like Dajue where things connect, places like Bing Feng. You know, if you think about the 3 points here, you have Bing Feng, and directly across from it, you have Trip Han, and then directly above it, you have Zhong Jing. Think of this, Taiyang, Shao Yang, Yangming, right? Gua Sha to this whole area is very, very important for a physical treatment, for a physical modality to release the exterior to keep these things from spreading. So when you're looking for where these things are transitioning, it's in the upper body. Many places, many times, you're going to find a transition in the upper body from Taiyang to Shao Yang to Yangming. Could move through Dajue where it connects, but think about that. These are going to be areas you're going to be giving gua sha to. The small intestine channel moves upwards to Dajue. This is where all 6 yang channels of the hands move before they move supraclavicularly, meaning to the front, to Trip Han. So this is going to be a major area of transmission. You're going to want to open and clear this and release this area. Oh, go back. All right, let's see. We got another question here. Let me see. All right, so might I address the relationship between the Wu Yin and the Liu Qi? I will do this a little bit later in the whole thing. All right, stress tightens neck and shoulders. Yes, so the stress that you experience can be, if you're sitting at a computer all day and everything gets tight, this can be a wind reaction, a wind cold reaction. This could be a Shang Han reaction. Probably more of a wind, right? You're resisting the idea of change. Your body doesn't want to sit here anymore, and it's tightening up, and it doesn't want to do anything. This would be a wind reaction, right? And the longer you force it to sit here, and you force what? You're slouched. Yang can't come up. What happens? It suppresses yang. You get cold, right? So this could also be this as well. Oh, wait, go back. All right, so physiologically, we have yang. It's anchored in the lumbar spine, right? It rises up the Du channel, and it pushes 1.5 sun out to the bladder, right? It starts in the Yao Shu. So the Yao Shu, the bladder shu, governing vessel 2, right? GV2, Du 2. And it moves up GV3, and then GV4, Ming Men, is a point that most people focus on, and then it moves out. However, keep in mind this yang moving up and out starts actually below Ming Men, and it starts at Yao Shu, right? So with this movement of yang moving up the spine, you have yang qi that can push out cold and cause the body to sweat. But if there's not enough yang qi to push this out, what happens? Things get stuck in the head, right? If you can't fully push out cold, you're trying to push it up, but you can't, and it gets stuck. It'll get stuck in the head, and it'll cause constriction. Then that's why somebody gets a headache, right? So this is seen in what? The pain in the head, the headache principles in the Taiyang channel. This is the reasons why they're there in the Huangdi Jing. So one of the important things, if you just take the Huangdi Jing and you just treat according to that, would be what? To disperse wind, right? You could use points like Feng Fu, very common point used in the Huangdi Jing to disperse and clear wind. Starts here, right? So just below the occiput, Du 16, right? Dajue would be another one. Bing Feng, to grasp the wind, would be another one. Another technique you can use is to thread, right? We're talking about, before we mentioned Daju, to clear out wind. Daju and Bing Feng, you can thread and then disperse to lift and thrust or twist to clear out wind from the, you can disperse, you can needle down through bladder 11 to bladder 12 to disperse wind from the exterior. Notice how we're sticking with the Taiyang and the governing vessel. We're not going to the lung points on the arm. We're not doing this. We're sticking to Taiyang. This is the idea of Shang Han Lun based acupuncture. You're basing it on the 6 levels and the transmission of things. So after you would needle this to clear wind, then you want to invigorate yang. You can do this with massaging, scrubbing, hot towels. You can do this with a hot sea salt scrub. This is very good to warm yang. So a lot of times you get the salt hot and then you rub it up and down the back. I've seen this done in China, and this helps to warm yang. You can also put salt in the navel and do moxa on top of that to warm the lumbar. You can use heat lamps. I've even seen them do things in China with like ceramic pots that they rub up and down the spine. We call it yun, to iron, right? This idea of yun is or yun fa, to iron. And it's ironing warmth, ironing hot. You can moxa, you can do all these different things to warm the spine. So this is a basic idea for treating wind based on Taiyang, as you would see commonly discussed in the Huangdi Jing. Again, they're giving you an idea. They're not saying this is the only way to treat it. They're saying use this idea. They're showing you a principle through the use of what? Du points and Taiyang points, right? So they're suggesting staying with Taiyang and moving it through like that. So then you would want to address transmission, right? So you would want to gua sha things. So after you needle, you might want to gua sha. Maybe you gua sha first, if you want to address it first to open up the exterior. The idea is you're going to gua sha to pull things out as you're dispersing. So you're going to gua sha the upper body. You're going to gua sha what? Gallbladder 21. What? Bing Feng, small intestine 12. Trypan, small intestine or stomach 12. You're going to find where it's the most tight, where it's the most painful. Gua sha up the neck to release and out. You're going to keep this thing from moving deeper. You're going to get it out right at the surface. This is his basic idea for a Taiyang treatment based on theories out of the Huangdi Jing, right? So you're moving blood to release wind, right? So this is this idea. You're doing it physically. A lot of times people talk about it herbally, but how do we do it with acupuncture? We can do it with needles. We can do it using gua sha. Gua sha is a good way to start. This way it doesn't travel any deeper into the body. Would I use distal Taiyang points? Yes, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that point. That I'm just going over first a basic summary of like Huangdi Jing ideas, and you're going to see how this kind of progresses. So here we go. Distal Taiyang points, releasing with related Jingwell points. So using the related Jingwells. So think of this. Kneeling Jing wells corresponds to what? It corresponds to the working of the exterior of the body. So the Jing wells associate with what? We talked about how this Wei Qi, what, floats in the vessels, right? And it goes down to what? The tips of the fingers, right? And the tips of the toes. This is this explanation for the Jing, the sinew channels, right? And the Pibu, the skin cutaneous vessels, right? So what you're going to do is that you're going to look and see what's going on. The less severe something is, it's leg channel issues. The more severe something is, it's leg and arm. It travels up. The leg are not able to get it out. They're the longest ones, they're the biggest ones. They're the ones that cover most of the body. If they fail, it'll move up to its arm pair, according to the 6 levels. So arm channels are more severe than leg channels. So if you include small intestine, you want to make sure that you're guarding against transmission, meaning guasha, because the idea is that the bladder wasn't able to deal with it. Now it's moved into small intestine, and it has a chance to what? Move into Shao Yang now, and then Yangming. So you definitely want to make sure you guasha, right? So other points that can be used to needle to release Jing wells, maybe on somebody who doesn't have an arm or a leg, somebody whose Jing wells you can't get to, things like this. You can replace gallbladder 21, right? Zhong Jing and Huan Tiao gallbladder 30. They release the Jing wells, and they'll influence the channels on the arms going down to open the Jing wells, and then thereby opening the sinews, right? Qigong, governor vessel 6, can also be used to regulate Yang Qi as it moves up the body. Bladder 45, if you find contraction, right, in the chest, the lung qi can't diffuse because there's constriction due to cold in the chest or due to reaction, because the lungs need to diffuse their body to induce sweating. Bladder 45 can be used for that. Remember, look at what the points mean, where they mean what on the channel, and you'll actually see at certain parts of the channel, multiple points will seem to have the same physiological reactions with the body, because that's what the channels at that aspect are affecting in the body, right? What's the reason for guashaing up versus down? So guasha up is the idea of releasing up and out. If you can't get things up and out, you're too far down in the body, then you can guasha down. This is the general idea for that. If tween-hour rolling is used, can it substitute guasha? You can give it a shot. In fact, what I would do more than tween-hour rolling is nia. So this is commonly used as a substitute for guasha, this plucking until it gets red. I've done this a lot with people. You'll induce sweating very quickly to be able to diffuse and disperse lung qi. So nia, this pinching aspect, is what works very well as a substitute for guasha if you don't have anything to guasha with. Spoons can be used. Pickle jar lids can be used. Anything with a rounded edge that's not too sharp, those things can all be used for guasha. Oh, let's go back. So we've got that. Also, look at the lateral shoe points, palpate them, look to see where they're tight, needle and disperse them, particularly in the upper body, right? The bladder 11, 12, 13, maybe even the diaphragm, bladder 17, gushu, right? Another point, wind can come up into the eyes and affect the eyes, right? So Zanju, bladder 2, can also treat wind as it rises to the eyes, red eyes. As the wind rises, it turns into heat and vents to the orifices. You can get this redness of the eyes, you can get itching, right? Now, in the Huangdi Neijing, we talk about how pathology moves into the Yangming. I got a question here. What do I mean by arm channels more severe than leg channels? So the idea of arm channels being more severe than leg channels means that arm channels are they're the more exterior than leg channels. Even though they work together and they're both exterior, the arm channel is the leg channel is supposed to keep things pressed away first. So the idea is that when you have the pathology coming in, you will use the leg channels first to push everything away, right? So this is what's going to happen. If they fail, it'll move to the arm channels. Think about it like this from a structural point of view. All right, so if I'm pressing against a wall, I want to relax the arms. The power comes from the legs. However, if my legs are compromised, what happens? If they're not strong enough, if my structure's bad, what happens? I'm going to end up using the arms more, right? The same thing goes with a physical injury. If I'm doing something, say in boxing, when somebody takes a hit, they want to move out of the way, but if their legs are strong, what happens? It redirects the force through their legs, even if they get it a little bit. But if they got weak legs, chances are, what happens? They're going to get injured in the area because they can't redirect the force. The same thing here with an external pathogen. When you have an external pathogen, you have the leg channels trying to defend from this external pathogen first. They're the largest, they're the most young. If they fail, their backup is their arm pair. So that's the bladder paired with the small intestine. The small intestine will try to do something, but now that means it's moved a little deeper in the pathology, in the pathway of Taiyang. You'll get more severe symptoms for that Taiyang level, or that Shao Yang level, or that Yangming, or Tai Yin, or Shao Yin, or Jue Yin level. So remember that if you're seeing less severe symptoms in that level, it's a leg channel thing. If you're seeing more severe symptoms, it's leg and arm, because the legs weren't able to fully deal with it. So it's moved into both aspects of that same level. I hope that clarifies things. All right. Moving cups can be used. Move them up and out if you're trying to clear things. Moving cups would be done more about, they would be dealing more with clearing cold, but I've used them for heat when I don't have something to gua sha. Isn't rooting different to the most distal? I don't know exactly what that question meant about rooting. All right, so day 2, Yangming, right? So we've got Yangming. So in chapter 31 of the Han Dynasty, we talk now about it moving to Yangming after Taiyang, right? So day 2, the pathology moves to Yangming. So you now have heat. You tend to see symptoms of fever, dry nose, pain in the eyes, right? Difficulty lying in any position. So sleeplessness, which can also be translated, if you read Chinese, into like insomnia. That's kind of like the idea here. So again, I'll explain the idea of the moving of Wei Qi through the Yangming vessel. A separate line, referring in this case to this chapter, they're referring to the arm Shao Yang, also ascends to reach the front of the ear and converges with the carotid collateral channel at the neck, flows to leg bright yang. This then makes a descent and moves and reaches the top of the foot. They're referring here to where it branches off at stomach 9, goes down to reach the top of the foot where it enters the 5 toes. The channel follows back in the descending until it reaches the tip of the little toe. The protective chi then spreads over the canthus of the eye. So it moves up to where what? Bladder 1 is, right? So stomach, bladder 1, stomach moves. It's the primary channel, we say, starts here, but in this case, the flow of Wei Qi doesn't necessarily start there. So the arm yang channel of the hand, or descends the arm yang channel of the hand until it reaches the gap of the tip of the little finger on the external side, right? So keep this in mind. If you look at the CEU channels, you'll see that's what they're describing. They're not describing primary so much as they're describing the CEU aspects of where the Wei Qi flows. It's really kind of important. Let's see. I got another couple questions here. I just want to see what they are. On day 2, it moves into Yangming, right? It moves into Yangming. So the stomach, right? Wei produces this yin qi, right? This nutritive qi. When the body is afflicted, the yin qi comes to support the Wei qi, right? In dealing with the pathogen. The da chang, the large intestine, is in charge of the jin fluids, right? As the yin qi is converted to Wei qi to support this resolution of this pathogenic factor, this will cause heat. This is what makes the person feel super hot. This is what makes them want to eat ice cubes, drink cold water. They're in bed, they're so hot they can't deal with it. They throw off the blankets. This makes somebody want to go outside in cold air. Maybe it's, below freezing out, and they've got this blasting Yangming furnace fever, and there you can just sit outside in shorts and not feel like a problem, because in the conversion factor of this yin that moves to Wei, one of the byproducts is a lot of heat, which is trying to burn this pathogen off. And this is what's created internally. This is why Yangming is this idea of Yangming fire, right? So this is what is produced here. So the yin qi comes in support of the Wei qi. So this is yin, right? The first character is yin. I'm sorry, I wrote these slides early on actually for a class in Beijing, a little bit of these Hongine Jing ones, and I added them to this, and I didn't even realize they didn't have the English to them. So when I was doing this for a class that spoke English and Chinese, but you'll find out in the latter part of this, all of this stuff is written in pinyin as well, so you understand what it is. The Ying Qi comes to support the Wei Qi with a pathogenic confrontation, right? While still in the Taiyang stage, right? So it's trying to support, it's moving, the stomach is moving and the spleen is ascending this fluid up to support Wei Qi in this confrontation to try to keep it in Taiyang, right? But what happens in that process? If you're pushing up all your fluids, it can then what? Weaken the Ying Qi in the stomach, thereby making it vulnerable, the Yangming vulnerable to an invasion. So we start in Taiyang. Taiyang's like, help, I need help. The Yangming sends up its reinforcements, its Ying Qi, to convert to Wei Qi, right, as much as it can, right? And it's trying to support its fluids to create more Wei Qi, right, in Taiyang, along with what? The kidney Yang, which also supports Taiyang. When the Ying Qi is up here trying to deal with things, it's making Yangming deficient. And that allows what? The pathogen to then eventually move into Yangming, to transfer from Taiyang to Yangming. That's one of the reasons why it transfers. Yangming is abundant in qi and blood. So when dealing with a pathogen, it gathers all of these resources, qi, blood, fluids, everything, and it moves them to expel the pathogen. That's why you get a lot of coughing, nose blowing, vomiting. You know, there's a lot of physiological reactions happening, but this is just a summary and idea of why this is happening. You have a lot of abundance, you have a lot of things in the body trying to push this out, and a lot of heat being made. So this is this reaction in Yangming. So as I said before, Jingming is where the bladder, the large intestine, and the small the stomach all meet, right, and they communicate. But the deal is due to a deficiency in Yangming, due to this Ying Qi not being able to normally physiologically ascend to what nourished the eyes, right? Due to heat ascending from Yangming, the channel, and bothering the eyes, you could have eye pain. If the eyes feel weak, the person feels weak because why? If the eyes feel weak and this is obstructed here, we said before that the Wei Qi, this protective Qi, moves out the channels and into the body from here, right? So if this is obstructed from here, then what happens is the movement of Wei Qi is obstructed and the person will feel very weak, right? Yangming connects to what? Yin Shang, this idea of welcoming fragrance, right? Large intestine 20, and also the Ren Zhong, governing vessel 26. So you've got this idea of this heat that's starting to move in and around the mouth, into the nose, into the area of the upper orifices, eyes, nose, mouth. And we'll see later in Yangming symptoms, this is why you see Yangming symptoms that can have orifice problems. You can have bleeding gums, you can have herpes outbreaks, you can have sores and things like that because of this heat that's moving up the Yangming channel, right? I don't want you guys to just memorize, oh, these are all the symptoms under the pathology. I want you guys to know how the channel is moving, right? Why you have eye issues, because this heat's rising up to the eyes, because the Yangming fluids can't nourish the eyes anymore because they're battling a pathogen. Why you have heat here and around the mouth and the nose. All right, let's see. I got some more questions maybe. All right. All right, let's keep going. All right, so stomach fluids. Normally, like I said, they go to moisten the orifices, but now they're going to create this surging yang in an attempt to push out the pathogen. They've changed their goal, right? They're trying to do something else right now. So the majority of it's going to do these other things. At the same time, wind can astringe the pores. So if wind astringes the pores, it closes these pores. They can't sweat out the pathogen. So you get this heat that builds. It can't vent. It starts to move up, right? It's trapped. It starts to move up. Because the Wei Qi, the defensive Qi, is battling the pathogenic factor, it can't home in on the chest, right? So it can't move back to the chest at night because it's battling this thing. It's battling it in the limbs. It's battling it in the channels. It's battling it in these places. Then what happens is it's battling it in Yangming, in the abdomen. Then normally at night, what happens? The Wei Qi homes back in on the chest to the heart, right? Because it can't do that, you get restlessness because the Shen isn't feeling, rested. Also, the fact that there's so much Yangming, or there's so much heat in Yangming the heat will affect the heart and you'll get a restless Shen. So the person can't fall asleep. Therefore, by the time this pathogenic factor gets to the orifices, we've moved from an unresolved Taiyang condition to a Yangming condition. So when you're going from a Taiyang condition. You can have a little bit of itchy eyes in this, but when you start to get a runny nose, yellow congestion, even bloody noses, teeth issues, eye issues all together like this, you're in a Yangming condition, right? So if you're working with a patient, they aren't getting any better from treating Yangming, it could be because you need to go back and free up Taiyang. You're trying to get the stuff out of the body, but what happens? The chest is too constricted, right? So if the chest here is too constricted, around the chest and diaphragm, if you can't get this stuff out, then, and you're not sweating, you can't diffuse qi, right? Because the chest is constricted, so you can't seem to get this good sweat on, you're not going to be able to clear Yangming. So you might need to go back and what? Gua sha, right? Open the chest, needle the points that we talked about before, with and needle around the diaphragm and the upper back to what? Open the chest to promote. This is the area of the Yangming cutaneous vessel that comes from the areas of bladder 13, 14, 15 around the scapula and around the chest, right to underneath here, this loop. Gua sha that area to open up the surface of Taiyang to help unrestrict the heart, to help the person sweat things out, and then treat Yangming and see if then you can get this stuff to resolve. We need this pathogen to go out through the previous stage, so it has to pass through Yangming. It has to pass through Taiyang, from Yangming to Taiyang. If your Taiyang is constricted, you're not going to get it to pass out through there. And so you're going to have trouble getting rid of it. In fact, it won't really resolve. So that's why you always have to make sure that you can get Taiyang open. That requires you to have sufficient qi to diffuse, right, from the lungs. So think of Taiyang as the head. When it moves in the sensory orifices, that's Yangming. So when you start to have a head issue, it becomes an eye issue, nose issue, mouth issue. This is just one idea of pathogenic progression I'm giving you. That can be Yangming. Then as it starts to descend into the chest, some people say, oh, it went from my head and now the flu is down in my chest. That's Shao Yang, right? So that's the idea there. So if somebody comes to you and they start coming down with a cough, they feel like they're coming down with something, they're achy. Then they get this head congestion, they feel kind of hot, they get this yellow phlegm and, all these things going on, eyes itchy, maybe they break out in cold sores, around their mouth, and they're having this yellow. That's a Yangming condition, even though it might not seem major. What happens? It's a foot Yangming, right? And then they say, oh, it's draining into my chest. That's Shao Yang. So now you have an idea of a progression. This is a channel affliction, not an organ affliction. So don't think, oh, well, it's not in the stomach, so how can it be? Because it's the stomach channel, because it's the large intestine channel. It's not the organ. And a lot of times today in modern TCM, we focus so much on the Zangfu, right? But it's actually the Jingluo. It's actually the channel. It's actually these channels that are going through the body that you have a lot of this initial pathogenic invasion. So this is why, when people ask me, oh, well, but it makes so sense, if it goes into the lungs, you're thinking at it in that stage from an organ point of view. This is a channel point of view. They're two different things. I just put up 4 fingers. I meant 2 different things. All right. All right, let's see. Please read this of the Taiyang. You've got those in the notes, so I already I went through those. The Taiyang ones. Please hold off on you guys. Oh, okay. All right. So here we go. Shao Yang, day 3, right? So in Shao Yang, so the Huangdi Neijing talks about in chapter 31 all of these conditions. On day 3, the pathogen will move into Shao Yang, right? And they list a few symptoms. They list deafness, they list rib pain, they list chest pain, they list ear pain, they list tinnitus, right? A lot of things you go, well, why? Why are they doing this? Because it's different presentations that people have as the pathogen moves in the channel. Not everybody will have one, right? The same presentation. Depending on where they're weak, what aspects of the channel are weak, or just how strong that pathogen is or where it's settled, they'll have those, they can have those symptoms. So just something to think about. For example, like with COVID, some people lost their taste. I had patients who had lost their taste. I also had patients who had heightened taste and was so disgusted by what they were tasting. But you didn't hear that so much because that didn't sound so unusual. But take into consideration, both of them have COVID. It was the way it was presenting. And they were both in the same stages of COVID. But depending on one's body and depending on the other's body, they reacted differently. The pathogen moved into different areas, affected different things. But it's still all within the same channel system, right? So in this case, you could have a Shao Yang patient with rib pain, chest pain, difficulty breathing. You could have another Shao Yang patient with ear pain and tinnitus and only a little bit of chest tightness, right? Depends on where it's moving. Wind would move up more, Cold would move down more, but it's still under the idea of Shao Yang, right? All right, so I included again this idea of Wei Qi flow just to back up and show you guys how it flows. All right, so we don't have to totally go over this all the time, but here's another one of the idea of how the Wei Qi flows in the Shao Yang, right? So chapter 76. The protective qi spreads and separates in the inner canthus of the eye, descends the leg minor yang, right? So that's Zhu Shao Yang, the leg minor yang, and flows to the point adjacent to the little toe, the fourth toe. As it ascends, it follows the arm Yangming channel section along the side of the little finger, right? To the next finger, the ring finger, and descends, reaching the acupuncture gap at the finger. A separate line also ascends and reaches the front of the ear, hence why you have deafness, and converges to the carotid collateral channel of the neck. And then this is where it explained how it flows into the leg bright yang in the last one, where it makes a descent and moves to the toes of the top of the foot. This is the explanation of how it flows now to the stomach channel. So I had added this little bit to the last stomach channel so you can see how it flows. This is explaining that it moves, the flow of Wei Qi moves Taiyang, Shao Yang, Yangming, right? This is the explanation from the Ling Shu chapter 76. Again, they go over it more about the Yang vessels than they do about the Yin vessels. The Yin vessels, they talk about how the Wei Qi moves internally and travels through the organs. But I wanted to include these, and you'll see these come up later in other parts of the lecture, because I just want to cite this so you can understand, well, how come we're doing this? Well, how do you know where it's going? Because of Wei Qi flow. That's why, because of channel flow. Super important to know how things flow into one thing or to another. That's how you get your acupuncture to work. Channel physiology, channel anatomy. That's how you understand how channel pathology moves. All right. So, Huangdi Neijing, Shao Yang, day 3. So, if it hasn't entered, if this pathogen hasn't entered the yin organs by now, then it can still be cured by sweating, right? So in Shao Yang, it can still be cured by sweating. Once it enters the yin organs and it's internal, you can't sweat it out. You have to purge it out. So you'll see sweating is used in Taiyang, in Yangming, in Shao Yang, right? But when you get into Tai Yin, you get into Shao Yin, and you get into Jue Yin, you can't get it out that way. But at least here, we can still sweat it out, right? But here's the problem. The pathogen is now moved into the chest. You have this clumping of qi, this tightness, this constriction, and you have this wind heat rising, right? So this is why you get these symptoms, these distensions, distension of the chest. You feel oppression. You get earaches. You get the Danjing, the gallbladder channel affected up the side of the body. You can get tinnitus in the ears. Why? Because this wind is rising up the gallbladder channel because it's tight and it's trying to move up, right? But it can't get out. It's moving up, and you get this high-pitched sound in your ears, right? At this point, all of the yang channels are affected. All the yang jing, all the yang channels are affected. That's what you have at this point. So now it's gone through Taiyang, now it's gone through Yangming, and now it's gone to Shao Yang. All of these have been affected. And that's something that, that's a sign that they've all been affected. So now, once they've all been affected and it's moved into Tai Yin, the yin stages, you can't sweat it out. You have to support the yin stages to push it back to the yang stages to sweat it out. But before we get there, and we'll take a quick break in a second because I see it's about time. If the question here, though, it says, what if a patient is too deficient to gua sha out of Taiyang? Then you're going to have to tonify the support for Taiyang. And it sounds to me like that patient might not actually have a Taiyang condition. They might have a Tai Yin condition. And that Tai Yin condition or a Yin condition might be the major issue. And the Taiyang that they're experiencing is only the immediate acute thing. But the chronicity is actually what's causing the problem. So I would suggest that you strengthen them first before you try to gua sha anything out. All right, in the Ling Shu, in chapter 21, they talk about a series of points to treat these Taiyang, Shao Yang, and Yangming disorders. Ling Shu, chapter 21, you talk a lot about windows to the sky, right? These windows to the sky points, as we call them. So a lot of them have the word tian, which is the idea of heaven, right? So windows to heaven, if you want to call them that. So this idea of tianju, so this idea of the celestial pillar, bladder 10, right? Base of the neck. This is used for dizziness, wind rising to the head, obstruction of wind coming up to the head, obstruction of wind in the channels, right? Tian Chuang, the heavenly window, right? Small intestine, 16 has been used for deafness. Then we go to the Shao Yang, right? So I give you a couple ones here that are typically used for Shao Yang conditions. Notice that the Shao Yang conditions are more in the Sanjiao channel. And then the last ones are the stomach. And this would be in Yangming. So Ren Ying, Fu Tu, these can all open to clear head issues, to clear issues in the upper body that are related to an initial invasion in the Yang stages. So we're going to break here, and then we'll go into the Yin stages. Donna can take it over. We're going to have a 10-minute break or so, maybe a little more, and then we'll pick back up.